Good afternoon. It's Friday, the 12th of August, 2016, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. I will be joined by live video Skype link by David Scott with Northern Exposure. Well, a word on the weather. It seems that summer has returned to quite a bit of the UK at the moment. So we do have some blue sky and sunshine down here in Plymouth. And I think the forecast for the weekend is pretty good. And what can we say? Delighted with that. Well, matters defence have been of interest to the UK column for quite a long time. We predicted that Britain's armed forces were to be undermined, broken up. This was principally to help force Britain's armed forces into an uneasy partnership with particularly the French, but it was also to help form joint EU military forces. And I'm going to say that the bulk of our predictions over that made 4, 5, 6 years ago have turned out to be correct. But we're fascinated to see really the quality of some of the senior officers who are now attempting to defend the pitiful state of particularly Britain's Royal Navy. And this particular gentleman was brought to my attention. We'll bring him in. He's Admiral Alex Burton, Rear Admiral Alex Burton. And he's been very big on Twitter over the last 24 hours. He seems to be getting very excited over the fact that there's been some criticism of Britain's armed forces. And it's now emerging into quite a bit of the international media that, quote, Britain's Royal Navy is in a pitiful state and is certainly unable to properly support the Americans. That produced some tweets from the Rear Admiral, and he said that we had 3 capital ships with 2 on the way. Now, when he's talking about capital ships, he's talking about major warships of great power and intent. What he's really talking about is troop carriers designed to put the Royal Marines ashore. So this is not huge numbers of troops. In the right scenario, this can be very effective, but very questionable as to whether at the moment we can actually state that we have capital ships. Now, what's interesting about this Twitter dialogue is that Peter Hitchens got involved, and with regard to the aircraft carriers that are still not in service, he said, well, it's more or less, it's no good the Admiral crowing about the aircraft carriers, no planes to put on them, and hardly any escorts. And back came Alex Burton, and he said, don't like the word escort, but we've got 19 frigates and destroyers and a large F-35 order in the last defence review, and that questions your comments. Well, of course, the word escort for frigates and destroyers is absolutely correct, and of course what these ships are needed for in one of the most prime roles is actually to defend aircraft carriers. So we're in the position at the moment, those aircraft carriers not fully built, not in service, don't have the aircraft, and even when the aircraft arrive in 2017-18, of course, it's going to take at least another year for those crews to be trained up to operate them. And the Admiral seems to have forgotten that the Type 45 frigates are not able to deploy because they don't seem to work in warm water. Well, let's have a look at the Twitter page again, because I think it's worth having a look at. He says he's commander of UK Maritime Forces, husband, father, warrior, and sailor. And I don't know if I'm the only person here, but I'm slightly concerned about the way this senior officer sees himself. He's been promoting some very dubious analysis on the invulnerability of American aircraft carriers. And just to be a little bit professional here, very powerful ships, but they need their escorts in order to make sure they're fully protected. So at the moment, UK is struggling to get its carriers to sea, and there are no aircraft. And this tweet from the Admiral, I think, deserves the prize, because it says, with a picture of cars in an early morning traffic jam, presumably from 9 to 5, what you need to do is join the Type 45. And we'll just add to that sorry, that it's a shame that they don't work in warm water. So we'll bring in David. Of course, the Royal Navy has been bringing a huge amount into the economy north of the border. I'm going to catch you on the hop here, but how do you see things going now that Nippy Sturgeon is running around in Europe trying to see whether they'll still support her? Is she going to support the Royal Navy?
Well, no, because Nippy Sturgeon wants her own navy. She doesn't want to be part of the UK and will do everything possible to break it up. I have to say, as someone who's not got any military background, but has looked at the history of these things just to quite some extent, I've been astounded at the decisions that have been made regarding the Royal Navy, scrapping the carriers before new ones are serviceable, scrapping the Harriers before we have a replacement, scrapping the maritime patrol aircraft. It looks, even from an uneducated, non-service background, utterly incompetent. I can't imagine that Nicola Sturgeon will improve this situation.
I don't think she will, and of course you've raised some good points about her recent trip to Germany, which we'll come on to a little bit later in our news today. But fascinating times. Incompetence seems to be coming in everywhere, appearing everywhere. We've got a breakdown of public services, an inability to do things which as a nation we used to do very well many years ago. And I also know that you're going to be talking a little bit about this with the Clwyd Piven scheme or psychology later in the programme. But just give us a taster of what that is about. It's a doctrine of breaking down a nation state, is that right?
Yes, this is tied into George Soros, it's tied into Saul Alinsky, and it's tied into the Frankfurt School of Cultural Marxism. And the objective is to destroy the society so a new socialist communist society can be built in its place. And it does this by overloading and breaking down things such as the welfare state as a matter of policy. And the poor are used to achieve this. Now it's all sold as though it's been done for the poor. It's nothing of the sort. They are simply being used to achieve a political end.
A very dangerous political end. Okay, well, we'll come on to that a little bit later, as I've said. But we're going to get straight onto the subject of how do you get into a nation state? How do you control politicians? How are Britain's MPs being controlled, and why are they doing the dirty work of people who are quite clearly hostile to the basic nation state of Britain? And in that I'm including, of course, Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland and England. Well, the subject is the abuse of children, and I'll pop this one back on screen because I stand by this. Why do we keep banging on about child abuse? Because this is the engine of the criminal, perverted Westminster elite. And if we get to grips with what's been happening with our children, we will be able to identify the criminals who are currently running the country, and we are going to be able to improve the country. Now, we're not just talking here about Westminster, because of course we can follow this story north of the border. And I'll recap here. We did bring this up on screen the other day, but we've got some really excellent letters that have been written principally by a lady, member of the public, but she's got straight to the point. This is one letter that she's written to Jack Murray, who's the Child Protection Policy, Children and Families Directorate, quite a mouthful, but a man who is essentially in charge of the protection of children in Scotland, and she takes him to task. But of course, the same lady has also written a letter to Ms. Sturgeon. Now, it's quite long, but I'm going to ask people to stay with me because this is really a fantastic piece of text where somebody has completely nailed Ms. Sturgeon and the Scottish Government. So it's an open letter. It's your refusal to uphold the rule of law. It says, "Thank you for your acknowledgement of my letter received by you on the 5th of August 2016. The hounding of the Doherty family, which was unlawfully instigated by Police Scotland after Brian Doherty reported a man who offered him £25,000 for access to his 4-year-old autistic son, continues. The 4 Doherty children remain in care in the Republic of Ireland. Their perfectly sane parents are remorselessly pursued with a view to sectioning them, brackets, shades of the old USSR. Scottish institutions sink further and further into a mire of corruption as no attempt is made to remove the rogue elements busily engaged in debasing them, and you indicate by offloading the responsibility onto other less potentially effective shoulders that all this has nothing to do with you. Are you happy to be presiding over a country where the powers of law enforcement are conferred, in the words of prominent Scottish journalist and supporter of the SNP, Kevin McKenna, as a feral and out-of-control police force, which, armed with guns and accountable to nobody but itself, is running amok, which, far from maintaining law and order, has apparently entered into a criminal conspiracy with a foreign government to attack those whose lives and property it is paid to protect. What kind of independent Scotland do you envisage? Is it one where the rule of law no longer holds sway, where criminals masquerading as police officers terrorise the population and children can be stolen, screaming, from their parents by virtue of fabricated concern reports? Please note, once again, Janice and Brian Doherty have never been accused of any crime. No valid case against them has been advanced in a Scottish court. No trial is taking place, or indeed likely to take place. You would not, therefore, be violating the separation of powers should you choose to intervene on their behalf. You would simply be upholding the rule of law and the right of law-abiding people to be left in peace. Again, there is no evidence beyond unsubstantiated allegations elicited by Police Scotland and dismissed out of hand by an inconveniently honest judge in an Irish court to suggest that Janice and Brian Doherty are anything but irreproachable parents. Indeed, the appointed guardian ad litem has written to them as follows: "From my own perspective as a children's guardian ad litem, I can assure you that I believe and have informed the court that you have 4 wonderful children whose presentation abilities, sensitivity, and care for one another is testament to you both and the loving which you've provided to the children. You should therefore only be endorsing this lady's unbiased professional opinion you would therefore only be endorsing this lady's unbiased professional opinion should you intervene with the Irish government to restore the Doherty children to their loving parents. You know, and the Dohertys know, and those of us who have been writing to you on behalf of the Dohertys know, that there is no lawful reason for you to refrain from offering this lady your assistance. Please stop spinning the line. Yours sincerely, Gillian Swanson." David, this is a really incredible letter because it takes quite a lot of information. It just drills into the key elements of this case. Do you expect Nippy Sturgeon to respond?
It will be the line. But it's beautifully put, and I think that letter's fantastic. One of many fantastic letters that have been going in from many people to the authorities, and pointing out that simply saying, well, I will point you in the direction of the complaints department for X department is not good enough. There's clear evidence of criminal wrongdoing. To do nothing is to endorse that criminal behaviour, is to protect that criminal behaviour. And the nothing that we're getting from Nicola Sturgeon and so many others, including Enda Kenny in Ireland, is simply unacceptable from a point of view of lawful conduct.
Right. Good news. We have got some movement, I believe, with, well, information that's coming in about the case itself. Now, I know some of this is very sensitive and we're having to protect identities of people giving us information. But can you give us a little bit on the latest with regard to help from the public?
Yes, we are getting quite a lot of information. Um, we're trying to get, on one front, a full picture, without any help from Police Scotland, I may add, a full picture of Alan Lowe, and we hope to have something shortly on that up on the website. And we're also unpicking the relationships between some of the other players in this story. It is now known to us, for example, that the policeman named the designated perjurer by the Dohertys, who appeared in Ireland to give evidence against them. This is a policeman they'd never met, who'd never met their family. And he stood up and he recounted how delusional these people were, despite that being also out with his professional competence. Well, he is also in the same office as many of the other players. We're talking a friends network here, operating on one level against the Dohertys. And we're starting to make those links between the individuals. But on a much larger scale, we have had shocking testimony come in to us from well-connected people that has substantiated essentially every single allegation that the Dohertys have made. It has substantiated their worst nightmares about what was going on when there was excavations on that estate. It refers to bodies, it refers to the disposal of bodies, and it is stunning evidence, and we're looking to add to this, and there will be more to report in weeks and months to come.
Okay, right, thank you very much for that. And one of the themes really that we can say in these investigations is that it's quite clear the public is now starting to move. Individuals are prepared to start asking questions and write letters. And of course, this is really what is essential in order to bring our politicians and people who are in control of this situation to book. Well, let's just remind ourselves that problems with children are not restricted to UK, but I've just dropped in this particular report because it's pointing out that the Anglican Church is under huge pressure. This is in Australia, Newcastle, but we've got exactly the same thing, that a policeman trying to investigate the sexual abuse of children connected with the church has been harassed and attacked. David, I think you know a little bit about this one.
Well, it was interesting. This was a church officer, in fact, who was charged with investigating, became the target of home attack. Now, this again is something that we're seeing a pattern. One part of the pattern is if you ask the wrong questions about the wrong people, we will target your family. But not you, we'll target your family. Now, this can be in terms of home attacks, in terms of violence, or in terms of using social services to seize the children, a common threat, one that your policeman John reported as a threat that was made against him. So we're seeing the very nastiest element of totalitarian regimes and how people are controlled by fear manifests itself all around the Anglo-Saxon world.
All around the Anglo-Saxon world. And how interesting, isn't it, if we think back, and we're going to be talking about the child abuse inquiry in a minute, that of course we had Ms. Goddard brought in from New Zealand, but she didn't last long. Well, just to reinforce this point that this stuff is going on in Europe, it's going on overseas. This is a very brave lady, Roly Post, and this lady was working for the European Union. She was tasked to go into Romania to look at conditions in the children's homes, and she quickly discovered that actually Western world was being told a lot of untruths about what was going on, and they certainly weren't being told that children were being taken from these orphanages and trafficked for abuse. When she tried to do something about it, she was threatened herself. She later lost her job. and she produced this book, which I'd encourage people to get hold and read. I believe it's available as a free PDF now on the internet, Romania for Export Only. And this is the story of this lady and a very brave lady colleague when they tried to do something about what was happening with these children. And I can tell you that in the book, she talks about contacting British MPs. And of course, what did they do? Nothing. Well, let's remind ourselves of the power of the British state. This was an earlier BBC report, and it was talking about the Crown Prosecution Service being fined because they lost data, fined £200,000 over the theft of interview films from a laptop. But basically, this was video footage linked to 31 investigations containing dozens of abuse victims. And oh dear, that data went to a company called Swan Films in Manchester, and there was an unfortunate break-in, and unfortunately all of that data disappeared. So we've got the British state losing documents to do with Israel and nuclear weapons. We've got data being lost due to child abuse inquiries, films. Bit of a problem, really, losing all of this stuff. It's very careless. Well, let's just have a look at what's behind the fear factor in the British state. This is a network that we did a while ago, but before we move on to the child abuse inquiry, I think it'd be useful to recap. So here we go. Westminster VIP abuse ring. And of course, this is a key part of it, the Grafton Close Children's Home, Richmond Borough, which was supplying children. We had the Elm Guest House in Barnes with a gay and paedophile guest list, senior MPs, Cyril Smith, high-ranking police, wealthy men, National Front, Sinn Féin, Royal Household, MI5, pop stars, and apparently even the Soviet spy Anthony Blunt. And the key lady running the organisation, Carol Kazir. But we also had links into the Conservative Group for Homosexual Equality, chaired by Ian Harvey, a junior Foreign Office Minister. We had the Tory Monday Club with links, and also we had some tenuous links with Peter Wrighton, paedophile, who was used as a children's home consultant. He was linked himself to key members of the Thatcher government, and that brings us in a neat little circle back to those Conservative groups. Well, we had the National Children's Bureau Health Minister was Virginia Bottomley, patron, not a lot of progress there. We had links through from Peter Wrighton to the Paedophile Information Exchange, and that brings us nicely to Harriet Harman and the National Council for Civil Liberties, now known as Liberty, which, amongst other things, campaigned for relaxation of rules on pornographic pictures of children. Well, there was a police raid connected to the Carol Kazir Elm Guest House, and she was then quickly to die of a drug overdose. But abuse victim Chris Fay says that she was murdered. And Chris Fay is later threatened and has had some pretty unpleasant experiences with the police in London. Abuse victims also been threatened by the police. And the only conclusion you can come to is that you've got the high-level protection of paedophiles. Now, I'm going to add this one. This is South Wales case. UK column reported for years on this. A little girl, Bonnie Lewis, kidnapped at gunpoint, not in Ireland this time, but in Florida, after false accusations were made against the mother by Neath Port Talbot Social Services. And despite the fact that all of the evidence has now surfaced, the girl, an adult, has not been reunited with her mother. So what took place? There was a failure to diagnose a serious illness of the little girl. A healthy appendix was removed by Neath Hospital when they had no license to operate. There was a cover-up of a severe post-operative abscess, excessive prescription of drugs. Some of those drugs were not approved for use on children. negligent prescription of oral morphine, incorrect discharge and prescription forms, confused and incompetent hospital referrals, false denial of Bonnie's pain by doctors and social workers, and of course when the mother took the girl to America and achieved a proper diagnosis of Zollinger's disease, Neathport Talbot Social Services arrived with a false passport and the child was taken. David, this one we've followed for some time, but of course there are great similarities with what has happened to the Dohertys, because in this case it was when the mother started to point out that outrageous malpractice was going on in the local hospitals. This is when the state started to close in on her, and ultimately her child is taken at gunpoint in a foreign country, aided and abetted by social workers and false documentation. Doherty's in Ireland, there seems to be a pattern to this. I think we might have lost audio, which is a shame. Have we got you?
Yes, I beg your pardon.
Okay.
The critical thing is that the most dangerous thing you can do in Great Britain is to tell the truth about the authorities.
Okay. Thank you for that, because this is exactly it. So let's bring in Jersey, Haute de la Garenne. And we've got here, at the time, it said police set to question 13 celebrities, politicians and sports stars in investigation into historic child abuse on the Isle of Jersey. We put over the top of that, spot the key words, historic, they're just allegation, but they're celebrities and famous people. And we now know that alongside our very brave Metropolitan Police whistleblower, the police who were initially brought in to investigate and were convinced children had been abused at this location, they were later vilified and removed from the job. And this is
example, Brian, is of course.
So can we come back on screen, Theo, please?
Is the allegation, because this is a coastal location, and the allegation is that the bodies of victims are disposed of at sea, so there are no remains to find by excavating, because they're disposed of at sea. Indeed.
Okay, well, let's just bring this one back on screen, because this was a report. I've chosen the BBC, but it appeared in other places, that in a Norfolk paedophile ring case, the police were investigating social workers. And this is where we start to get to the nub of the system, that if we have paedophiles embedded in the very services which are supposedly there to protect children, then of course we're in a very dangerous position. And we can follow that with this lady. We've got Susie Smith, admitted falsely accusing a gentleman called Jonathan Coupland of attacking his 6-year-old child in an official custody case note. She said, "I was under pressure at the police station to exaggerate or confirm what I'd written." Note what the panel says at the bottom of the screen there. It said that the investigating panel had found she'd made the false allegation, but did not do so dishonestly. And they're going to decide whether she's guilty of misconduct later. David, I had great problems with this, that she made a false allegation, but she didn't do so dishonestly. Can you explain that to me?
That's a tricky one, Brian. That's difficult. I had a similar situation with in a business dealings with the Clydesdale Bank in Scotland, where their manager was lying to me as a matter of policy. And when I raised this with senior managers within the organisation, they said, well, what do you expect us to do? You know, what other policy could we possibly follow? I did suggest that thou shalt bear no false witness would be the policy. And the line went very quiet for a while after that. Is this a situation where we no longer have any idea of what truth means? Have we lost all sense, at least in government circles, that there's anything other than convenience, there's anything other than what fits, what gets the next salary, what pushes the the problem down the road for another mile. Ideas such as there is a thing that is truth and there is a thing which is falsehood seem to be out of favour. It's all just one grey area. Everything's lukewarm, and therefore there is no truth. There are no lies anymore. Is that what we're seeing? Are we dealing with people and organisations who are actually incapable of telling right from wrong?
David, my opinion, we're absolutely seeing this, and this is policy which is not being driven into the civil service. It has been driven in, and we are now suffering from the result, so that we see the responses in terms of lines and spin, and we are not seeing the truth. I think it's reasonable to say that we're now nearly 2 weeks in to requests for 2 senior politicians, former policing officer Mike Penning and his replacement Mr. Lewis. We've asked them to comment on the testimony of our Met Police whistleblower. A stunning silence, absolutely nothing, no acknowledgement, no thank you for the information, no concern, a wall of silence. And then from our Home Office to date, we have simply concern, could we tell them at what point in the tape the name Mr. Penning is mentioned? No concern for the little girl dead in the gutter, or the other children being horrifically abused in London, or the cover-up by the authorities. But the only concern, oh dear, at what point was the name of Mr. Penning mentioned? So we'll just push home this point about how the system works. Let's bring in our unfortunate social worker who lied honestly or dishonestly, I can't remember now, but she did lie over the abuse. And she is part of this system, so that we've got social services using historic information, hearsay and perjured evidence to accuse the parents. The local authorities abuse their powers, falsify evidence, and they take the children. The legal teams act as integrated units with social services to persecute the parents. This is quite an industry. The parents, of course, get stressed and distressed, but are affected to fight for their child in a secret court outside of the eyes of the public. The parents take on legal advice from law firms who profit from the case, and the parent solicitor then works behind their backs, collaborating with the local authority and legal team. The children gets appointed a guardian, those guardian ad litems. Now, to be fair, in the Doherty's case, we've just heard that that individual was prepared to say the Dohertys were very good parents, but in many cases we see the guardian ad litem simply doing the bidding of the courts. And the guardian is appointed a solicitor who sides with the guardian, of course, rather than the child. The parents get stressed by being told to undergo psychiatric or psychological reports. That has happened to the Doherty family. And the parents are then drawn into a web of secret hearings where they are guilty until they can prove their evidence, their innocence, I beg your pardon. Meanwhile, the child suffers distress and neglect in foster care or a care home. And at the centre of it, we've got law firms, local authorities, care homes, charities, feeding off the children and earning billions. And let's reinforce this picture because, of course, it was the very brave social worker, Carol Woods, who has told us in interviews that she was told to lie by the local authority so that they could steal children. There's no misunderstanding here, David, is there? This is a template system. It's a criminal conspiracy to take children and make profit from those children.
It's a criminal conspiracy at one level, and at another level, it's something slightly different. There's a school of economics called public choice economics, which was developed by two economists in America called Buchanan and Tulloch. And what they showed is that the sort of economic decisions that people make when they're in the private sector are mirrored by decisions they make in the public sector. So all of the things that they say about how it's all for your good, the public sector is there to serve you, and all of the chit chat that you get, that it's a public service and that it's selfless, is actually not true. Now, what they showed is that you can predict quite accurately what people will do to simply maximise their own personal advantage. So when you're looking at something like a public service that provides childcare or security like the police or healthcare, then what the agenda is to maximise the amount of public resources that are captured for that service. But because there's a disincentive to work, because people are naturally a bit lazy and will try and have an easy life as they possibly can, there's a corresponding attempt to minimise the amount of actual childcare or healthcare or safety that you provide. So you get to a situation where we pay more and more and more, and we receive less and less and less, as anyone who's had their home broken into recently will probably attest. So you have a huge publicly funded massive state where people are making individual choices to benefit themselves that mitigates very much against any sort of fair treatment for the ordinary man or woman in the street. And on top of that, and utilising that, there's a far more insidious criminal conspiracy where people are very much involved in the very worst criminal activity, be that fraud, be that murder, be that abuse of children, or be that quest for political power using all of the above.
Yeah. Okay, well, let's jump in now to the saviour, because apparently it's this lady, Alexis Jay, because she's the lady who's going to take on the child abuse inquiry south of the border. She has said that politicians wanted to keep a lid on it, but as we're going to see, she is going to take them on and sort it out. Now, I've labelled the pearls of wisdom and respectability there, and just want to keep those pearls in mind, because as we'll see in a minute, she does come under a rather different guise. Well, I went to look at her report in Rotherham, Independent Inquiry into Child Sexual Exploitation in Rotherham. I encourage people to get hold of this document because it is remarkable how bland it is. It does not name individuals. It does not call for prosecutions. It does not take individual failings in public office, malfeasance in public office, whatever it is. It is a wonderfully crafted document which gives some lessons learnt, but there's no substance to it. Don't take my word for it, have a look. And I also noted that, and I think this is very significant, it did not draw any conclusions. Normally in formal reports, you have the body of the document, and then you draw conclusions from all of the work that's gone into that main body. And from the conclusions, you make recommendations. Not so in this report. You simply have the text of the report, and then suddenly it jumps into these amazingly bland recommendations. Well, let's have a look at the lady without her pearls. And here she is. She said, she didn't. I decided to say this is the reality, that she decided to keep her Rotherham report clean. No names, no recommendations for police investigations and charges to be brought, no conclusion, no worries. But there she is with a very fine Egyptian collar. Presume that'll be something to do with her rank. And what else did she say? Well, she said, no one knows the true scale of child sexual exploitation in Rotherham over the years. Our conservative estimate is that approximately 1,400 children were sexually exploited over the full inquiry period, 1997 to 2013, but nobody knows. Nobody knows. And she then goes on to say, and I think this is the key bit, the abuse is not confined to the past, it's carrying on today. So no worries, we've had the investigation, we haven't named anybody, we haven't got anybody into court, it's continuing, but no worries. And we've got this one. Over the first 12 years covered by this inquiry, the collective failures of political and officer leadership were blatant. At an operational level, the police gave no priority to child sexual exploitation, regarding many child victims with contempt and failing to act on their abuse as a crime. David, this is absolutely key because she doesn't talk about people, she talks about officer leadership. It was the leadership at fault. The people were fine. It's just that maybe they lost a few documents. Their leadership was a bit dodgy. Is this woman in the real world?
Well, yes, there are never specifics. No one's held to account, because what do you get if you have this failure of leadership? You get early retirement and a golden goodbye, it would seem. That there is no actual price to be paid. I seem to remember, Brian, in the Royal Navy, they used to hang one or two of the admirals every now and again to encourage the others. I understand that actually worked quite well. If we had a situation where some people in serious positions of power were actually prosecuted and actually did some jail time for what they did, for the decisions that they made, perhaps we would see an entirely fresh attitude amongst those who allegedly serve us.
Indeed. I think the sad part is that the hanging was largely of the sailors and not of the admirals, but certainly I think it would work quite well with the establishment figures. So we've got this. This is where she takes the thing. Let's have a look at this statement from her. In 2013, the council leader, no name, who has held office since 2003, apologised for the quality of the council's safeguarding services being less than it should have been before 2009. This apology should have been made years earlier, and the issue given the political leadership it needed. This is absolute cover-up material, absolute cover-up material. We don't know how many thousand children have been abused, with the full horrors of what that means. But this was a little bit of a leadership problem by an unknown person. And if we correct the political leadership, everything will be okay. Well, just the lady to come into the big inquiry. So we get rid of her Egyptian period, and she's now in the big pearls. She says she's committed to ensuring that this UK inquiry does everything it has set out to do, and does so with pace, with confidence and with clarity. And she's made a vow to fearlessly examine institutional failures past and present. Now, I see in our chat room somebody has said, well, actually, Rotherham victims of abuse have actually praised her. Well, I'm interested in that. All of my senses say that this lady has been brought in to do a job. Keith Vaz is singing her praises, and perhaps that's a good reason to suspect something's not right. But of course, the other remarkable thing is that Miss Goddard apparently left because she didn't have any real understanding of English law. So we've brought in Miss J, who has no qualifications in law whatsoever. Well, the Home Office is pleased. This is Amber Rudd, and this is what she's got to say. Let there be no doubt our commitment to this inquiry is undiminished. We owe it to victims and survivors to confront the appalling reality of how children were let down by the very people who were charged to protect them, and to learn from mistakes of the past. And this is the same Amber Rudd who runs a department, I think, of some 15,000 people that were unable to listen to the Metropolitan Police officer's testimony until we sent them their own special copy for somebody, an unnamed individual, to assess that. Well, let's leave child abuse, but we will hop back to Nippy Sturgeon, because those nasty Germans, I understand, have been a bit unkind to her. You've been following her on her tour of, well, where's she been? Berlin, I think it is, David.
Well, she went to Berlin, and the embarrassing thing was all of the major politicians in Berlin had left. And there was really no one there of any stature to meet her. So she was interviewed on German television, and the first question was, Ms. Merkel's not meeting you, the Deputy Prime Minister's not meeting you, the Head of Finance isn't meeting you, the Foreign Secretary's not meeting you. Do you feel you're not welcome in Germany? That was the opening question, and it went downhill from there. So yes, Nicola's attempt at being a world stateswoman is still rather struggling.
Yeah, well, I'd have to confess I did take the snapshot from the video, and I did capture her with her eyes closed, but perhaps she is actually blind to the realities of the politics she's now got herself into. But there is good news because, of course, exclusive reports that you found for us here that she's now joined the French resistance. What's going on?
Yes, this is a tweet that she's here dressed up as someone who's joined the Scottish resistance, and the suggestion is, having failed in Germany, she's going to try and ally herself to France. We've tried that before in Scotland. It's not always gone well, Brian.
No, apparently not. We'll have to have a separate discussion about that one, David. But more good news, and that is that people who've been politically advising former Procurator Fiscal Eilish Angelini seem to be in sticky troubled waters at the moment. And Peter Watson's name is still being linked in with the trouble around Heather Capital. This is quite a good report from, I think this is Peter Chirby, is that correct?
This has been a Kirby's report, yes. I encourage people to look this one out. There's a lot of detail there. This is Levy and McRae. People who have followed the Holly Gregg, Robert Green affair will know Levy and McRae very well. They were the key law firm in Scotland when it came to silencing media. Levy and McRae and their former partner and now suspended judge Peter Black Watson are both still on the line for a very large multi-million-pound claim by the liquidators of Heather Capital. So that's going forward. It's going forward to proof stage. We'll watch this one very carefully. It's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it's a bit of a shame that that senior legal man, Mr. Watson's been caught up in this, and of course he was a judge as well. But we'll wait.
He was. He had to be suspended as a judge. He offered to stand down, but Lord Gill uncharacteristically said, "No, that's not good enough." In order to maintain the high standing of the Scottish judiciary, he required to be suspended. So that's pretty bad, Brian.
Pretty bad indeed. Now, more good news, because you're telling us that the Catholic, or elements of the Catholic Church, have decided that they're not very happy with the named person scheme either. And so we've got this little report here from the Diocese of Dunkeld. Where is that actually?
Well, that's in the where I am. That's the local archdiocese that goes up to as far as Dunkeld Cathedral, and it covers Perth and all areas round about. Now,
you have to give us the detail, David, because anything north of Exeter is a little bit scary for us. So.
Yes, well, it's all of those nice hilly areas that I took you around when you came up to see us some months ago. This is a very interesting issue here because this is 2 years and more into the No to Name Person campaign. They've been through 3 court hearings. They've had a major win with the Supreme Court, and only now is the Roman Catholic Church starting to say, well, actually, this is an assault on family life. We shouldn't have this, and they're encouraging, the bishop is encouraging his parishioners to sign the No to Name Person petition. So that's a very major move forward as we get one of the main churches now backing this campaign. Still no word from the Church of Scotland. They seem to believe whatever the Glasgow Herald tells them to believe, as far as I can tell. But we have hope that maybe they will at one point see the light and realise that fascism is not something that's compatible with Christianity.
Yeah. And we are really encouraged by, well, the quality of material that's coming out, other people really focusing on what's happening. We mentioned the Alice Through the Looking Glass, Alice Moore blog spot yesterday. Several people said, can you give us the address for that? So it's on the top of this screen if you choose to freeze it. But the article that you picked up on was, I was intrigued by the Express article, revealed that New Zealand had abandoned the Gerfeck Light scheme after branding it useless.
Yes, this is very interesting. That New Zealand, which is a country made up mostly of Scots who learned to win at rugby, and of a similar size to Scotland, very similar makeup in many ways. They had a Gerfeck-like scheme, which was to watch people and introduce services and to sort out their lives for them, courtesy of the state. It was branded useless, but very interestingly, the minister responsible in New Zealand wrote in the margin of the proposal document containing this policy, "Not on my watch. These are children, not lab rats." Now, New Zealand is very fortunate to have a minister who's still able to think with that degree of clarity. We don't have anything approaching that in the SNP administration in Scotland, I'm afraid. They are no longer able to identify the difference between children and lab rats, but we're trying to educate them, Brian.
Okay. All right. Well, look, let's. We've got a couple of minutes left. Let's just bring in the subject of agendas which are changing society, and this is your Clywyd Piven report here from discoverthenetworks.org.
Yes, I didn't know about this until this last week. This is dates from 1966. It comes from Columbia University. Two people at Columbia University by those names. Now, Columbia University, interestingly, is the university to which the Frankfurt School cultural Marxist cabal fled when they were thrown out of Germany with the rise of the Nazi Party. So they went to Columbia and they took all of their ideas to Columbia, and they didn't return to Germany until the late 1950s. So you see these ideas having taken root in Columbia now coming back out. And what this policy was to destroy the society, destroy Western society, destroy the welfare state by overloading it with demands so that the entire system would break and the economy would break and they would destroy capitalism by that subversive means so that they could build their communist utopia on the ruins that they would have created. So it's a very interesting read. It looks at how policy decisions were made. They were backed by George Soros, amongst others. They were using ideas from Saul Alinsky, and it was couched in terms of protecting the poor, but what it was actually about was destroying society. The poor were merely pawns in this strategy.
Right. And of course, we got many other indications that these malicious political agendas are what's causing the problem in the country. We've only got to look into David Cameron's Big Society, based on the works of Marxist Saul Alinsky, to see that it's pretty obvious what's going on here. But this, of course, is a cross-party agenda. The party differences are simply part of the puppet show for the public, but the real agenda driving through in the background. We're now at the stage still of children being stolen. Okay, well, let's bring in good people. I think it's appropriate to remind ourselves that there are good people out there who are prepared to take risks to do the right thing. And this lady, Bethan Jenkins, one of the Welsh Assembly members, is very much in my mind because this lady has been prepared to take on colleagues in the Welsh Assembly to get to the truth of the Linda Lewis affair. And she quickly found, of course, that she had some pretty aggressive responses from her political colleagues, and indeed was not too impressed by the attitude of the local South Wales police. What do we need to do? Well, when good people appear, be it the Metropolitan Police whistleblower or Carol Woods or this lady, we need to see the public support swing right behind them. And we'll end on the fact that the public is using its wise eyes to see what's going on. And David, you found this picture of one of your Scottish colleagues, I think, which will just pop on screen.
This is the great Potu bird, and I spotted this on a tweet. I thought the best tweet of the year, and the tweet said, we should nominate the great Potu bird as the official animal of 2016, because it really sums up the spirit of the thing.
Yeah, excellent. I encourage people to go and have a look at, you should be able to Google this quite easily and find a site with quite a lot of detail about these birds, and pretty interesting they are too. Well, thank you very much for joining us, David. As always, we're going to stay on the case of what's happening with UK's children, because if we do that, we know what our politicians are really up to. And of course, if we have politicians who are prepared to lie over the abuse and murder of Britain's children, those same politicians are prepared to lie over every other policy statement they make, be it defence, the economy, the NHS, or the general state of the nation. We need to change these people. We need to do it by lawful means. And that is why the British Constitution Group has now launched a new programme, which is Restore the Rule of Law. And that is exactly what we need to do if we are to stop this very dangerous and sinister decline of democracy in UK. Thank you very much to all of you that continue to give us information. We couldn't do what we do without you. And as we always need to say, if you're not yet a subscriber or a donator, please consider doing that, because we are getting more and more requests to help other people in order to travel, laptops, telephones, whatever else it needs, particularly if they're people who've been victimised by the British state. That's it. Thank you for joining us. We will be back same time on Monday, hopefully with Mike Robinson also in the studio. Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.